Hello, good afternoon. Hope I am audible. Yes, good afternoon and Jai Hind once again. So far, we have discussed in the earlier lecture how we can study literature. So there are basic components, and these basic components of studying literature, or we can say various approaches. So textual approaches, author-oriented approaches, just like biographical, psychological, contextual approaches, like sociological, like historical, feminist approach, and so on. At the same time, there is the fourth component, that is reader-oriented approaches. So, a form of literature, any form of literature, is to be studied from various perspectives. As I was dealing with poetry, some suggestions for you people. Number one, that is, my presentation is restricted to only NET and SET exams, as it requires a kind of cross study, and that's what it is not a lecture organized for UG or PG students in the classroom, but it is for keeping in mind that you people are taking the exam NET and SET. So let me have to share screen so that you can see PPTs. Only few points that I have mentioned in the PPT. Hope it is expected you have to take a notebook and pen so that you can take down the point. So here is the PPT. And yesterday I have already mentioned from the book, Mario Clara's book is there. In the references, I have already shown that one to you. As literature, any literary form, you can keep there. Maybe a poetry, drama, short story, a novel, an essay, and there are four major approaches. Here, while we study any poem, we of course apply such approaches. When we say it is a language used in literature, literature is of course in language, and it is to be studied from various perspectives, and number one, that is linguistic perspective. So any poem can be studied from all these perspectives. My point is that how to study a poem, we will go ahead directly to the general introduction to poetry. And this general introduction to poetry, there is no any such comprehensive definition of poetry, but still we find the origin. Of course, poetry is an age-old form of literature. Earlier it was, of course, the form of oral tradition, and people used to sing poems accompanied by certain instruments, maybe harp or any other instrument or drum. So the word seems derived from Greek word poio. That means to make or to produce. And the poet who composes a poem, who is called maker or creator. And that is what it is said that next to God there is poet, because who creates? The notion in the post-structuralist view, we find that the role of the maker is challenged, and the intentional fallacy, the term which was used. So the role of the poet does not remain as a maker, but other approaches, just I had already discussed, are also important. The reader is also important because the reader gives life to the poet or writer in general. So age-old literary form is poetry. It is a form of expression. And of course, there is no comprehensive definition, but some of the people, some of the critics, some of the poets have defined it. So poetry, what Signet says, it is a speaking picture. There is a definition by Wordsworth, which is very famous. Poetry is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, recollected its emotions in tranquility. And in preface to lyrical ballad, he tries to explain how the new poems are, which are against challenging the neoclassical tradition, and how the role of the poet should be there, the function of poetry. He talks about diction later on, the language of poetry, rustic language, and all this. So, it is a kind of overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility, as Wordsworth defines. It is also modified by several people, but its function is to teach and to entertain. So, several definitions you can find. A poem should not mean but be like this, or even Ezra Pound images moment and all this. People have explained poetry in different ways. Poetry in general are subdivided into forms, narrative and lyrical. I'm speaking broadly here. Major subdivision we find in poetry, narrative and lyrical, and in narrative form we find epic, Odyssey, Iliad, Ramayana, Mahabharata. These are the epics. Of course, there are several characteristics of epic, and later on we find the epics like Paradise Lost. So the narrative forms we find the ballad, for instance, Coleridge's ballad, the famous ballad, the rhyme of ancient mariners. Or there are several ballads which are narrative, which tells you a story. So there are narrative poems, or even you can say objective poems, where directly the speaker is not the poet. While lyrical poems, the word is derived from lyric. Lyric is any personal song having musical elements, and this music we find in the words. Dear friends, while we say poetry, and of course, a poem as a text, and this text, it has a title. Several words are organized in a systematic way, or we call that is idiosyncratic way of organizing words and phrases and lines and all this. So lyric is a personal poem, There are various types of lyrical poems as we find. So music is part of it. A word, as I have already explained, a word is not itself only a word, but it has sound, it has music. As a physical form, as a linguistic form, as well as it has a kind of music as well. So, the poetry we find is a combination of words, and of course, we'll study ahead with considering each point. Elegy, ode, and sonnet, these are some of the forms. I'm talking about only the major forms right now. We'll go in detail ahead. Suppose we say epic, but later on we find the mock epic, the form and style which is the classical one, but it is used for to mock somebody else or to satirize somebody else or the event or situation, etc. Elegy, of course, is a lyrical poem. It has a tragic tone, and there are types of elegies like pastoral elegy, and we know the famous elegies so far. Walt Whitman's elegy, "Oh Captain, my Captain," or there are different elegies as well. So, sonnet is there, ode is there, and John Keats's ode are very famous. The words, one of them is "Ode on a Grecian Earth." So, the attribution of various qualities to poetry we find, considering imagery. The word image comes from Latin word imago, that means picture, and imagery. We see imagery in a poem, a sensory perception, sensory appeal to the readers as well. So, an image becomes symbol, which stands for something else. So, the meaning we find in a poem as a suitable one for expression for the poet. Now we'll go to the next slide, and that is elements in poetry. What Mario Clarence, I have taken the model Mario Clarence. I know this is incomplete model for this purpose, what we are going to discuss. But for understanding the poetry, I find it is a little difficult for the students when there is an extract taken from a poem or a passage is taken or extracted from prose, any piece of prose, maybe a novel or maybe any other form. So while a short poem is taken for analysis, we have to concentrate the text from various perspectives. So in general discussion, you can find elements in poetry. So there are different elements. Of course, these are the elements we put in other words. So while we study poetry, what are the elements in poetry? So the elements in poetry, number one is lexical. That is lexis, that means words. At the level of words, words are the building blocks of any passage, any paragraph, any sentence, or any poem. I say text only here. So the words and thematic dimensions we find. So the diction, the word which is used as diction in a rhetorical perspective. The diction, what is diction? Diction means it is the way and manner the words are used, or the choice of words or phrases or the language which is used or employed to express effectively the poet's views or theme or whatever the poet wants to uh, give the message. So the diction may be a formal or informal. That is again a different thing because of there is a poetic license for the term which is the liberty the poet has. We call it poetic license. He can draw, he can borrow, he can form new words, maybe new coinages, sometimes a word which is used only for once and later on which is not used. Non-formation just we call it. So he uses several words. He takes them from various sources at the same time. The intention of the poet is to express or to say whatever he wants to say effectively, and that's what he uses or employs several devices. And choice of words is very, very important while composing a poem. At the same time, while analyzing poem, what kinds of words, what kinds of phrases, either from the formal situation or from the informal situation, from certain the language of certain communities, from the language of a certain area of study, just like register we say. So it is also possible, and of course, the meaning in poetry is not at the surface level. The two types of meanings, denotation, what we call it literal meaning or a dictionary meaning. It is a literal meaning, which is we consider in day-to-day language, but the poem has, or the words or the phrases which are used in poem have connotative meaning, associative meaning. So, not only carrying the denotative sense or literal sense, but beyond that, there is the meaning we call connotative meaning. And sometimes there are 6 types of diction, you can say formal, informal, pedantic, pedestrian, slang, colloquial, and so on. So the poet tries to make novel newness of expression by using various devices, literary devices, to make the poem new one. And it has the rhetorical figure. So the diction is there, the choice of words from various sources, and see, and that is what it does happen to the reader. While reading a poem, some non-standard words are used in which we do not get meaning even in dictionary. The poets try to use or employ such words which later on become the part of standard language and which occur or which are included in the dictionary. So the next point is that lexical, thematical, of course, all these rhetorical figures are achieved through language, the use of words. And this rhetorical figure, the word is derived from rhetoric. Rhetoric was a branch of study. And what is that rhetoric? It is the study and uses of written and spoken or visual languages. And logos, ethos, and pathos are the 3 types of rhetorical study we find. But basically, rhetorical is the study of, it is the art of persuasion, and its goal is to persuade, to inform, and to entertain. The same goal, which is of the poet as well. So to achieve this goal, poet uses various figures of speech in general. We say, again, we can broadly divide these two. The figures of speech which change the meaning, just like simile, there is a kind of comparison, simile, metaphor, irony, satire, allegory, and so on. Synecdoche, metonymy. I'll come to that one again in the next, or I'll come to the discussion of it. Then the theme of the poem. Theme, that is the subject of a talk, a piece of writing. And it is a work of art. For example, there is a poem by Robert Burns, which is very convenient, or which is well-known example. The poem by Robert Burns, and that is A Red Red Rose. My love is like a red red rose, and that sprung in June, newly sprung in June, and so on. It goes on. Its theme, the poet wants to convey the theme, the message, and that is love. That is the theme of the poem. That is the true love, fully bloomed love. So this is the aspect of lexical thematic dimension, what we call. The second one is visual dimension. While we see a text on a page, we perceive the poem. Either it is divided into stanzas, either it is divided into couplets, either it is divided into tarzaraima, 3 lines stanza, or like this we perceive it. But at the same time, the concrete poetry, that is what is called, we read the poem and we perceive the poem, we feel the poem, we perceive as an object of the poem. So while lexical thematic dimension we consider, just like in fiction, we find there is a narrator narrating the plot. Maybe a first person narration, third person narration, stream of conscious narration, and all this. Just like in poetry, we find it is a medium of expression. Poetry is a medium of expression. Of course, it is subjective, personal events which are expressed. For example, Tinton Abbey by William Wordsworth. As you revisit Tinton Abbey, it is an event. He describes the event. Poetry is an assumption which does not always correspond to the fact. So the kind of images and symbols and all this, it makes you, there is a famous poem and famous line by John Keats. The heard melodies are sweeter, but the unheard melodies are sweeter than the heard melodies. That means the imagination is important, and imagination is created into the words. So the issue of the speaker is here, and the narrator, as in fiction, as in short story, we find the speaker or the voice, we say voice or speaker in a poem. In subjective poems, or in personal poems, or in lyrical poems, we find mainly the speaker, maybe the poet, or may be a persona is created. So the narrator, the person, for example, there is a narrative ballad by Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Romantic poet, who had contributed to lyrical ballads along with William Wordsworth, and that is considered lyrical ballad. That is considered as the manifesto of democracy in literature. So Coleridge's poem, The Rime of Ancient Mariners, there is a frame narrative. The actual plot is there, and the first person narration we find. And this story, how one who is narrating to the others on a ship, and that the killing of albatross and all this. That is the background to the story. It is the ballad. And what is the ballad? Ballad is some kind of it is in between epic and lyric. So there is poetic language at the same time. And the language of prose and poetry, it is always argued. And sometimes the conventions of poetry, the conventions of poetry or poetic conventions, sometimes which are not applicable to the poem, like prose poems, like free verse, blank verse. So we cannot apply all these to such poems, and which does not come in this model. So out of this model, to come back to the point, visual dimensions, I was telling you. So the poetry is concrete one. It should be seen through the words. It is a picture. If you see the concrete poem, that is also called a closed poem. For example, George Herbert's poem. For example, Easter Wing, the poem. When we see the form of the poem as a verbal form on the page, printed on the page, we find how two wings are there, and it is just like the bird. So the Easter wings, we clearly find, we see, we perceive visually the two wings. There is another poem, the altar. So it is like the altar shape. That is the God. Of course, it is a religious poem. So, in the rhetorical figures, we all use images, symbols, and all this. But the concrete images, again, in the language, verbal, non-verbal expressions we find. So the concrete images we find which are important. So the concrete images, for example, the poem by in a station of metro. In these two lines, we find clearly the image of the railway station and how the crowded station we find. There is a poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. Only few words are there, and these few words we find the red wheelbarrow, which we perceive through our eyes, which are expressed in the words. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow. That is only the poem. And Ezra Pound, of course, there are the various influences and the movement we find. Here, third point, that is, I'll discuss it little later on, but we'll go to the ahead. Earlier, I had discussed lexical and thematic dimension, so poetic license, and here the main point, that is deviation. See, rhetorical figure, and now deviations, how the words are deviated. The newness in language of poetry, how we find the newness. It is achieved through the use of words we call lexical aspect, deviation. Suppose the word is deviated from a certain source, lexical deviation, grammatical deviation, how the poem is made new. There is the poetic license. It is a kind of license, the liberty the poet has to use. Grammatical, syntactic kind of the syntactic kinds of deviations, just like inversion of sentences, the rule of SVO or SV or SVO, the structure, normal structure of a sentence that is also disturbed or which is systematically inverted. For example, Shakespeare's famous sonnet, "Let me not the marriage of two minds admit the impediment." It begins with like this. So there is a syntactic inversion at the level of what is syntax, what is grammar. Grammar is a set of rules how phrases, clauses, and sentences are constructed, and at the same time, how sentences, clauses, and phrases are classified up to the word level, or they are parsed up to the word level. We call it grammar, and the organization of the systematic sentences as we find in standard language, or what we call automated language. Even you can say that one. So it is not a standard language of poetry. There are various experiments at various levels are we find. That's what we call deviations. So deviations can occur at lexical level or at the level of lexis, grammatical or syntactic level. Then comes graphological. Sometimes the spellings, which the same spelling, but the word, for example, fun. The word is same, but the meanings are different. Graphological kind of thing we find. Sometimes contraction of the form. Sometimes we find elision of vowel sound. Sometimes elision of consonant sound, and like this. So a kind of graph or the image we see. Sometimes semantic deviations we find. The same word but meanings are different. Maybe denotative and connotative meanings. A word has several meanings and all this. Dialectal kind of deviations in the sense that dialect, that means the language which is distinctive at the level of region. The regional differences, we call them dialect. And this dialect means the language from a certain region, which can be varied at the level of words, at the level of pronunciation. And we are all aware of the dialects like British English, American English, Australian English, Indian English, and so on. Like this, there are still dialects, and we find the words from various dialects. The grammar is the same. There is not much change in grammar while we consider dialect. So the deviations of register. So register is the language of a certain profession. There is a poem by the title is Forensic Medicine. The poem, I think Javola or some poet, I don't remember exactly the name of the poet, but there is a poem, Forensic Medicine. Indian poem is there, Indian, which is we find in Indian English. Forensic Medicine. The register of medical science we can find. My intention is that a register is a language of a certain profession, certain area, certain, for example, a register of journalism, a register of chemistry, like this. So deviations from historical periods. The archaic words are used, the historical words are used, the words which were used earlier might be centuries ago. The words, archaic words are used, and that is a deviation. For example, the poem by John Keats, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time." So the word is thou, these are archaic words. the words which are thought to be sacred, which are used in Bible. So it has the value, and the poet wants to say something else. So he wants to keep the sanctity of the Grecian. So these deviations, now you can find the difference between these deviations. Again here, I have added the stylistic or linguistic approach, what you can say. There is a book by Geoffrey Leach, A Linguistic Guide to Study of Poetry. So you can find all these deviations there in that book. That is an interesting book. Each and everyone should have to browse that book. Again, I'll request you, if you want some kind of material, I have already shared, on the screen, I have already shared my email ID, so that you have to put a request for the material, so that I will try and will send you some material as well. So my email, it is already given to you, or I'll put in the chat box. Here is a live chat, so you can have the mail there. So you can see the mail, or you can take down Vilas.Buwa, B-U-W-A, V-I-L-A-S dot B-U-W-A @ gmail.com. So you can ask for your queries, and even in live chat, you can see, or even you can write your question. Okay. So my point is that one. Here come to the point, rhetorical figures I have already discussed. In a literary criticism, we find these words. Here, the theme I have already mentioned. So stanzas and concrete poetry. Now here is the third kind of dimension we see. Here is a crucial point, what I feel is that, and this crucial point, that is the acoustic, rhythmic acoustic dimension. So the choice of words and their arrangement, which creates a kind of music. What Alexander Pope, in his essay on criticism, that was published in 1711, considers a good poem, content and sound harmonize and form a unity. Content and sound, which is harmonized and form a unity. A poem has unity itself. It is unique one. What the new critics say, a poem is, or a text is organic. It is complete one. It is closed one. So the reader extracts meanings from the text. So the sound must seem an echo to the sense. That is required here. So what is meter? That is the question. And generally the students, those having Marathi language background, they are just finding a little bit trouble in meter and all this. Just friends, just concentrate. What mean by meter here? So meter, how we find the meter? Meter is a kind of pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, how they are employed, or how we come to know the stressed and unstressed syllables. For that we need scansion. We scan a poetic line or a poem. So while scanning, we divide each line into syllable. So syllable is the minimum unit of meter. As you know, phoneme is the minimum distinctive unit in phonology, in phonetics. And you have already aware of the fact that there are 44 phonemes in English, 20 are vowels, and 24 are consonants. And there are three term labels and how you can classify. Vowels are classified in different manners, of course. High vowel, low vowel, then front, middle, back, and so on. Height of the tongue, and all this. So the classification is different one, that is one. My point is syllable. Syllable is the minimum unit for scansion or to find out feet. So the food is a bit, and food, it is a kind of grouping of we make. For example, in when we say iambic pentameter, there are 5 stressed and unstressed syllables we find there. So in iambic pentameter, unstressed and stressed syllables. This is the sequence, and we find 5 meters are there. So we classify or we determine the pattern, metric pattern, on the basis of stressed and unstressed syllables and number of feet in a word line. So when we say iambic pentameter, so iamb is classified on the basis of stressed and unstressed syllables. And the other criteria, how many or number of feet in a verse line. And just we decide, or just like iambic tetrameter, iambic pentameter, iambic hexameter, you can divide the line in such a way. The 4 major feet we find, and here we find these 4 feet. These are the major. There are several. Not only these are limited, but at the initial stage, you should have to understand what mean by iambus. Iambus, that means one unstressed syllable which is followed by a stressed syllable. It is a group of 2 syllables, and the pattern we find. So there are 10 syllables, and these 10 syllables form 5 feet, and each one of them carries the pattern unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, like this. So we call iamb. For example, if you have pen, you can note down. The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. That is the line. So the curve, it is 1 foot. Few tolls. Number 2. The knell 3. Of par 4. Sting day 5. So there are 5 feet which carries the pattern. We call it iambic pentameter now. So how meters are determined? We have to scan the verse line, divide it into syllables, and then find the stressed and unstressed pattern. See, here comes the point. Your phonology comes here. In phonetics, in phonology and phonetics, we find segmental features and suprasegmental features. Stress, intonation, tone, all these are supra-segmental features which are applied here. Anyway, come back to the point, and there are the four major iambic we call unstressed test, it is a pattern. Anapest, three syllables are good having the pattern unstressed, unstressed, stress, like this anapest. Stocky, two syllables. One is stress followed by unstressed. The fourth one, that is dactyl or dactylic. So one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. So you'll find all this. There are other three syllable feet, four syllable feet. So there are a major list of all these, but these four are most important. What I feel is that you can go ahead with the details. I'll share the title of the book for this. There is a book by John Leonard, The Poetry Handbook. The title of the book is The Poetry Handbook, a guide to reading poetry for pleasure and practical criticism, which is authored by John Leonard, John John Leonard. So you can read this book for further details. Of course, it is a very short time to discuss all this here, but my intention is that to let you know the general, to aware you generally, to acquaint you all these dimensions, so that we can analyze poetry at different levels. Okay. So these four feet, four major feet you can find. Iambic, anapest, trochaic, dactylic, and so on. So the categorization on the basis of feet which occur in a verse line, we can say it is a monometer, that means only 1 meter. Diameter, that means 2 meters are there. Trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter. So you can continue with it, but generally these are the major, what do you call it, categorization of feet. Here next comes the acoustic dimension. So you know how rhythm is achieved through stressed and unstressed language, unstressed levels. And while we say rhythm, see, English is stressed time language. English language is stressed time language, while Marathi is syllable time language. So the music, its naturalness is rhythm, which lies or which we find in the stress, either the syllable, again the stress, where stress is attracted, it is attracted to the vowel in the syllable. So what is the vowel which is in syllable? If we see, short vowels are generally not stressed, but the vowels which are long vowels, which are a combination of two vowels, diphthongs, which of course attract stress. Anyway, come to the point, and that is rhyme. So when we say rhyme, I'll come to rhyme a little bit later. But the music is found, the rhythm is found through meter, rhyme. The rhyme, we say internal line. There are major three types. The early three which are there, early three types. Internal rhyme, the rhyme which is achieved through alliteration, assonance, and consonance. The alliteration is a repetition of the same consonant at the initial level of word in a verse line. We call it alliteration. So this alliteration can be, you can find out assonance, consonance, the repetition of the vowel sound, repetition of the consonant sound, like this. We are very familiar about end rhyme. So the identical similar sounds or phonemes at the end of each verse line, which form a kind of pattern. So what kind of pattern? For example, Shakespeare's sonnet or English sonnet has a pattern of rhyming. A Shakespearean sonnet is divided into 3 quatrains followed by a couplet. AB AB, CD CD, EF EF, and G G. The couplet rhyme together. So the couplet, which envelops the theme or sums up whatever said or conveyed in the earlier 12 lines. So, end rhyme. There are various rhymes. Half rhyme, feminine rhyme, masculine rhyme. You can go further for various rhymes as well. But end rhyme is basic one, which is important. So here, I rhyme. The spelling we perceive. It seems that just like man and ocean, these are 2 words, suppose, which occur at the end of 2 verse lines. Man and ocean, the last an for the I, we find it the identical. Our eye perceives it. So it is I rhyme. Then we find the blank verse. Iambic pentameter is a meter, but which are not rhymed. So the last syllables are not identical. 3 words. So the conventions of poetry and the music as the part of convention. But some modern poets who denied to follow all this, but still it is verse, it is a poem. So we call it free verse. The French term verse libre, that is derived from, and we have to read the complete entry for that one. Repetition. It is one of the source of creating music. So the repetition may be at the level of word. For example, there is a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, Break, Break, Break. It is a very short poem, and how the sea water comes to the seashore, and how these waves are broken by clashing to the seashore. So, break, break, break. The repetition is contributing. It is a movement, but it creates the sound or it creates the music. Then comes parallelism. So the parallelism is there. Similar kind of expression is there. There is a poem by Walt Whitman about there is a poem. Yeah. So the parallelism we find in several poems, but that contributes to the The poem of Walt Whitman is about the spider. So he makes a parallel picture of the soul like the spider. The spider is in the corner of a house, just knitting the web to catch its prey. But the continuation, the parallel situation is of the soul, and the soul is also creating, and it is like the hand of a watch, tick, 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 like the movement we find. So this parallelism, the repetition, all this contributes to the music, to the rhyme as well. Not exactly the rhyme in the sense that the complete word is repeated. So rhyme, it is also the dimension of uh, poetry. Here, actually, I want to concentrate on several terms which are related to poetry, just like Alexandrine, couplet, ballet stanza, octave, sestet, octet, uh, Onjin stanza, Spenserian stanza, ballad stanza, heroic couplet, autorhyma, Tennysonian stanza, tercet, terzarhyma, triplet, ballad, autorhyme, arch rhyme, beat, blank verse, broken rhyme, chain rhyme, cadence, caesura, canto, uh, Kesmos, dialect, stroke, anti-stroke, anipod, food, feed, beat, cantion, fortiner. Fortiner, that means the what we call it sometimes uh, a sonnet itself called a 14 line stanza. And in the Elizabethan era, we find several sonnet sequences, just like Holy Sonnet by John Donne, Astrophil and Stella by Sidney, Amority by Edmund Spenser. Uh, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. So it is a kind of sequence which are tied thematically. And of course, now there are several free words, full rhyme, hexameter, homograph, hyperbole, uh, several things are there. But for this, we need to have some material as well. But I would like to suggest you some books. Uh, if you have the book by uh, Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory by J.A. Cudden. Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory by J.A. Cudden. That is the good one. You have to read it closely. It seems a little bulky, seems little thick, but you have to read that one closely reading. Now only find out uh, the entries which are related to poetry, and then it is good for we people. Yes. Now it is time for discussion. You are free to ask questions. You can even call me. So you can also ask questions. I have given you mail so that I can get idea. So feel free to ask questions. Unless and until you ask questions, I'm not getting the idea how it should be done. So the questions, see, for the last time, the questions will be asked on whatever we discuss, the patterns we find. So the patterns like how, for example, the lines from the Ode on a Grecian will be given to you, and you will be asked, just like thou still unravished bride of whiteness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, how there is a repetition of vowel sounds, how archaic words are used, and so on. So when suppose the discussion is on sonnet, we can think of several aspects of sonnet at the same time. So it is my intention to let you understand this one. And for the next lecture, how the various movements, various groups, various schools are related to poetry and several critical terms we can study. Suppose if you want to concentrate on figures of speech, again, simile, metaphor, image, imagery, symbolism, personification, oxymoron, irony, epithet, transferred epithet, metonymy, pun, satire, paradox, irony, cadence, caesura, chorus, choir, uh, archaism, eclogue, epigraph, and so on, pastoral, parody. So all these are important. Euphuism. So try to find out all these terms, and I'll try to prepare a question paper maybe of 50 marks or 25 marks, and so that I can share to you. So it will be remaining useful for you. I'll try for that. But for next time, I'll talk on the issues of groups of poets, historical events of poets. Like this, we can go ahead. So I think in a live chat, are there any questions, any suggestions, any comments you'd like to make? Only few students are watching, I think. But anyway, okay. So, shall I stop now? Just I'll stop sharing the screen and we'll come to you. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for joining this lecture. And if there are any comments, any suggestions, or if you want to go from in a different way, because of for net and set, you need to study. I mean, there you need cross study. It is not the way we can go plainly and then we can crack the exam. It won't happen. It needs cross study. It needs discussion. It needs a kind of debate. So you are free to ask questions. You are free to add to my discussion. So with this, and see, one more thing, we are trying, it is a kind of challenge and we are facing the challenge. So net and set is a kind of challenge. I hope all you are trying for JRF and try for JRF what I feel is so. So with this, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.